The phone call came at 3:47 inches the morning. I knew before I answered that it wasn't good news. Nobody calls at that hour unless something has gone terribly wrong. But I wasn't prepared for what my lawyer's voice would tell me through the crackling line. Eleanor, Daniel filed a custody petition yesterday. He's suing for full parental rights to Sophie. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. The envelope arrived by courier 6 hours later. Official papers, legal letterhead, all those cold words that somehow reduced 17 years of love and sacrifice into a court case number. Petition for custody modification, biological father's rights, best interests of the minor child. Sophie. My Sophie. The baby who'd been left on my doorstep like a package nobody wanted. I should probably start at the beginning, shouldn't I? Before the lawyers and the courtrooms and everything that came after. Back when I was just a mother who'd lost her only daughter, and a grandmother who didn't have any choice but to become something more. Rebecca died 3 weeks after Sophie was born. My beautiful, vibrant daughter who'd survived 27 hours of labor, who'd held her baby girl and cried tears of joy, who'd told me that being a mother was the most incredible thing she'd ever felt. 3 weeks later, a blood clot nobody saw coming. She was gone before the ambulance even arrived. Daniel fell apart. I understood that. Grief does terrible things to people. I was drowning in it myself, barely able to breathe through the weight of losing my child. But Rebecca had left behind a daughter, and that baby needed someone to be strong. I thought Daniel would lean on me. I thought we'd help each other through it. Instead, one morning I woke up to find a note taped to my front door and Sophie's car seat sitting on my porch. The baby was crying, her face red and scrunched, and the November wind was biting cold. The note said, "I can't do this. Every time I look at her, I see Rebecca dying. She needs more than I can give. Please take care of her. I'm sorry." That was it. No phone call, no conversation. Just a note and a 3-week-old baby who didn't understand why her father had driven away without looking back. I was 62 years old. I'd raised my daughter. I'd buried my husband 5 years earlier. I'd been looking forward to retirement. Maybe some travel. Definitely some peace. Instead, I was standing on my porch in Maine with a screaming infant and no idea how I was going to do this. But what choice did I have? Sophie was my blood. She was all I had left of Rebecca. So I took her inside, warmed up a bottle, and made a promise to both my daughter and my granddaughter. I would not let this baby suffer for her father's weakness. Those first years were harder than anything I'd ever done. I sold my car to buy a better crib and baby supplies. I took out a second mortgage to cover daycare while I worked. I was exhausted constantly, my body aching in ways it never had before. But Sophie was thriving. She was a happy baby, then a curious toddler, then a bright-eyed little girl who called me Mama and didn't remember anyone else. I tried to find Daniel, not to force him back, but to get him to sign proper custody papers, to at least file for child support so I wouldn't drown financially. But he'd vanished, changed his phone number, moved out of his apartment. His parents told me they hadn't heard from him either. Eventually, my lawyer helped me file for abandonment, and I was granted legal guardianship, then full custody. Daniel never responded to any of the court notices. For 17 years, I heard nothing. It was like he'd never existed. Sophie grew up strong and kind and talented. God, was she talented. She started drawing when she was 3, and by the time she was 7, her art teacher was telling me I had something special on my hands. By 12, she was winning regional competitions. By 15, a small gallery in Portland had given her a showing. I couldn't afford fancy art schools or private lessons, but Sophie didn't need them. She saw the world differently than everyone else. She could look at a sunset over the harbor and capture not just the colors but the feeling of it. Her paintings made people cry. They made people stop and stare and remember things they thought they'd forgotten. Last summer, when Sophie was 16, everything changed. A gallery owner from Boston came to one of her shows. Margaret Chen ran one of the most prestigious contemporary art galleries in New England. She stood in front of Sophie's painting for 20 minutes, just staring. Then she asked to meet the artist. "How old are you?" she asked Sophie. 16, Sophie said, nervous but trying not to show it. "I want to represent you," Margaret said, "exclusively. I think you're going to be one of the great artists of your generation." I thought she was exaggerating. But 6 months later, Sophie's first major show in Boston sold out. Every single painting. Some of them went for $15, $20, even $30,000. My granddaughter, barely 17 years old, was suddenly making more money than I'd made in my entire career as a school librarian. Margaret set up a trust fund. We had lawyers handle everything properly. Sophie's money was protected, invested, growing. She was set for college, for life, for whatever she wanted. And she wanted to go to the Rhode Island School of Design, had already been accepted early admission with a partial scholarship. The trust fund would cover the rest, and then some. I kept working, kept living in our small house in Harpswell, kept our life as normal as possible. Sophie still did her chores, still had a curfew, still had to maintain her grades. Money wasn't going to change who we were. Then came that phone call, at 3:47 the morning. Daniel had seen Sophie's success, not in person, but online. Her art was being featured in magazines, on art blogs, on social media, and Daniel, who'd abandoned his 3-week-old daughter on a cold porch, suddenly decided he wanted to be a father again. His petition was 60 pages long. His lawyer had done his homework. Daniel claimed he'd been suffering from severe postpartum depression, that he'd sought treatment, that he was now stable and successful. He worked as an art consultant in Boston, he claimed. He made a good living. He could provide Sophie with connections in the art world that I couldn't. He could pay for the best schools, the best opportunities, the best everything. The petition conveniently mentioned that I was now 79 years old, that I lived in a rural area, that while I'd done an admirable job raising Sophie, surely a young, healthy father with resources and industry connections was better positioned to guide her into her adult life and burgeoning career. What the petition didn't mention was that Daniel wanted to be listed as Sophie's legal manager, that he was positioning himself to take a percentage of her earnings, that he'd already reached out to Margaret Chen's gallery, claiming to be Sophie's father and representative. Margaret called me immediately. "Eleanor, what the hell is going on? Some man named Daniel Walsh just told me he's Sophie's father and that all future contracts need to go through him. He wants to renegotiate her representation agreement." That's when I knew. This wasn't about reconciliation. This wasn't even really about Sophie. It was about money and opportunity, and the fact that Daniel saw his daughter as an asset he'd foolishly walked away from. Sophie was devastated when I told her. She'd known her father had left, but I'd kept the details vague when she was young. As she got older, I'd told her more, but I'd tried not to poison her against him. I'd hoped maybe someday he'd have a genuine change of heart. "He left me?" she said, her voice small. "He just left me on the porch?" "Yes. And now he wants me back because I'm making money?" "I don't know his exact motivations," I said carefully. "But yes, the timing is suspicious." "I don't want to see him," Sophie said. "I don't want anything to do with him." But the law doesn't care what a 17-year-old wants as much as it should. Daniel had biological rights, and despite everything, he'd never had those rights legally terminated. My lawyer, a kind woman named Patricia Brennan, who'd reduced her fees drastically when she'd heard our story years ago, warned me this would be an uphill battle. "He's the biological father," Patricia said. "He's gainfully employed. He's claiming he was mentally ill when he left, which gives him a defense for abandonment. And Sophie is 17, almost a legal adult, but not quite. A judge might think reunification is worth attempting, even though he just wants her money? We'll have to prove that, and it won't be easy." The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. In the meantime, the judge ordered a custody evaluation and family therapy sessions. Sophie would have to meet with her father. She would have to sit in a room with the man who'd abandoned her and pretend to be open to a relationship. I watched my granddaughter, who'd been so confident and joyful, become anxious and withdrawn. She painted less. She smiled less. The light in her eyes dimmed. The first meeting between Sophie and Daniel was supervised, held at a family services office in Portland. I waited in the lobby, my stomach in knots, while my granddaughter faced her father for the first time in her conscious memory. Sophie was in there for an hour. When she came out, her face was pale but composed. "How was it?" I asked carefully. "He cried," Sophie said flatly. "He told me he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. He said he'd been lost in grief and couldn't see any way forward. He said he'd thought about me every day for 17 years. Do you believe him? Sophie looked at me with those wise eyes that had always seemed older than her years. He asked about my paintings, about the gallery, about my career trajectory. Those were his words. He used that phrase 3 times. My heart sank. Over the next month, there were 4 more supervised meetings. Daniel brought gifts, expensive gifts, art supplies that cost hundreds of dollars, books about famous artists, a laptop computer. He talked about introducing Sophie to gallery owners in New York, about showing her the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, about all the doors he could open for her. He's not wrong, Sophie said one night. We were sitting on our porch, watching the sun set over the bay like we'd done 1,000 times before. He does have connections. He could help my career. My blood ran cold. Is that what you want? I don't know what I want, Sophie said. I'm angry at him. But he's my father, and maybe he did just need time. Maybe he has changed. People can change, right? Yes, I said carefully. But 17 years is a long time, and the timing of his return, right when you're becoming successful, it concerns me. I know, Sophie said, but what if I'm wrong? What if he genuinely regrets leaving and I don't give him a chance? How do I live with that? I didn't have an answer. I couldn't tell her not to hope for a relationship with her father. That would make me the villain, the bitter old woman standing between a child and her parent. So I told her I supported whatever she decided, even as my heart broke at the thought of losing her. The custody evaluation took 3 weeks. A social worker interviewed me. Daniel, Sophie, Sophie's teachers, Margaret Chen, our neighbors. She toured Daniel's apartment in Boston, spacious and modern, with a bedroom already set up for Sophie. She toured our house in Harpswell, small and old but filled with 17 years of Sophie's artwork on every wall. The report came back 2 weeks before our court date. The evaluator recommended a gradual transition toward joint custody, with Sophie spending weekends with Daniel initially, then potentially more time during the summer. She noted that while I had provided excellent care, Sophie was approaching adulthood and deserved the opportunity to know her father. She noted Daniel's apparent remorse and his stable employment in a field relevant to Sophie's interests. What she didn't note, because she couldn't see it, was the calculation behind Daniel's smile, the way he'd positioned himself, the way he'd been carefully, methodically building a case not just for custody, but for control. Patricia was blunt. Eleanor, I think we're going to lose this. At least partially. The judge is going to order some kind of custody arrangement. So he wins? He abandons his child and then gets her back because she's profitable? Unless we can prove that's his motivation. And right now, it's just suspicion. That's when I remembered something. I went up to my attic, into the boxes I'd stored 17 years ago. Rebecca's baby things. The clothes Sophie had outgrown. And there, at the bottom of a plastic container, I found it. The note Daniel had left. The original, in his handwriting, taped to an envelope that had contained exactly $300. For initial expenses, he'd written at the bottom, as if $300 could cover even the first month of raising a child. But more important than the note was something I'd forgotten about. The envelope had Daniel's return address printed on it, the law firm where he'd worked at the time. I'd never thought about it before, but Daniel had been a junior associate at a prestigious firm. He'd been making good money, and he'd given me $300. I called Patricia. I need you to subpoena Daniel's financial records from 17 years ago, and I need you to look into whether he ever filed for paternal leave, whether he made any attempt to access benefits for Sophie, whether there's any paper trail at all of him trying to be a father. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Eleanor, that's brilliant. If we can show he had the means to help but chose not to, if we can show he never even tried to maintain contact or provide support, it shows this isn't about him being overwhelmed. It shows abandonment was a choice. The subpoenas went out. Daniel's lawyer objected, tried to block them, but the judge allowed it. Financial records were one thing, but what we found in his employment records was something else entirely. Daniel had never filed for paternal leave, had never added Sophie to his insurance, had never contacted HR about any benefits, but he had received a promotion 6 months after Rebecca died, a significant one. He'd gone from junior associate to senior associate, with a salary increase of $40,000 a year. He hadn't been overwhelmed and broke. He'd been building his career. We also found his phone records from that time. Patricia's investigator had done excellent work. In the 6 months after Daniel left Sophie with me, he'd made exactly 0 calls to Maine. He'd made 0 calls to my number. He'd blocked me on social media. He'd changed his email address, but he had made regular calls to a woman named Melissa. They'd started dating 4 months after Rebecca died. They'd moved in together 8 months after. Daniel had simply started a new life, one without the complication of a baby daughter. The pieces were falling into place. But we still needed more. We needed to prove his current motivations. That's when Margaret Chen called me again. "Eleanor, you need to hear this. Daniel came to my gallery yesterday. He wanted to talk about Sophie's next show. He had a contract drawn up. He wants 20% of her gross sales as her management fee. He also wants approval rights over which pieces she shows and at what price points." Did you record this? Better. I had my lawyer in the room. We have notes, and my lawyer is willing to testify. The final piece came from Sophie herself. 2 weeks before the trial, Daniel took her to dinner, just the 2 of them. The judge had approved unsupervised visits. I was terrified, but Sophie had agreed to go. She came home 3 hours later, and her face was different, harder, older. "He offered me a deal," she said. "What kind of deal?" "If I agree to live with him, he'll handle all my career stuff. He has contracts ready. He knows collectors," he said. "People with serious money. He can get me into shows in New York, Miami, Los Angeles." He said with his guidance, "I could be making millions within 5 years." My heart stopped. "What did you say?" I asked him what percentage he wanted. Sophie looked at me, and I saw tears in her eyes. He said 25%, 25% of everything I make, in exchange for his expertise and connections. He had a contract with him, Grandma. At dinner, he was prepared for me to sign it right there. "Oh, Sophie. He never asked about my art," she said, and now she was crying. "Not really. He asked which pieces sold for the most. He asked if I could paint faster, produce more work. He wanted to know if I'd considered prints to expand the market. He didn't ask what I loved to paint. He didn't ask what inspired me. He asked about market trends and price points." "I'm so sorry." "You were right," Sophie said. "He doesn't want a daughter. He wants a client, a profitable one." That conversation changed everything. Sophie asked Patricia if she could testify, if she could tell the judge exactly what Daniel had said and offered. The trial was set for early June. We arrived at the courthouse in Portland on a gray morning that threatened rain. Daniel was there with his lawyer, expensive suit, confident smile. He looked successful and stable, and exactly like the kind of parent a judge would want to award custody to. We sat on opposite sides of the courtroom. Sophie sat next to me, her hand gripping mine. She dressed carefully, professionally. She looked older than 17. She looked tired. Judge Carol Martinez presided. She was known for being fair but tough, someone who didn't suffer fools or emotional manipulation. She'd read all the filings, all the evaluations, all the reports. Daniel's lawyer went first. He painted a picture of a young man destroyed by grief, unable to cope, who'd made a terrible mistake but had spent years in therapy working through his trauma. He talked about Daniel's successful career, his stable life, his genuine desire to make amends. He called a therapist who testified that Daniel had been seeing him for 6 months and showed real progress. 6 months. Right around the time Sophie's paintings started selling for serious money. Then it was our turn. Patricia started with the financial records. She walked through Daniel's salary history, showing that within a year of abandoning Sophie, he'd been making over $100,000. She showed that he'd never filed for custody, never sought visitation, never paid $1 of child support, despite being legally obligated. "Mr. Walsh claims he was too overwhelmed to be a father," Patricia said. "But the records show he was functional enough to excel at his career, to get promoted, to start a new relationship, to live a full life. He just did it without his daughter in it." She called Margaret Chen, who testified about Daniel's request for a management contract and approval rights. She called Sophie's art teacher, who testified about how distressed Sophie had become since Daniel's return. Then she called me. I was nervous. I'd never testified in court before, but Patricia walked me through it gently. I told the story of that November morning, finding Sophie on my porch. I talked about the years of struggling financially, of working full-time while raising an infant, of taking out loans to pay for art supplies because Sophie's talent deserved to be nurtured. "Mrs. Walsh," Patricia said, "in 17 years, did Mr. Walsh ever attempt to contact you or his daughter?" "Never. Not once. Not a birthday card, not a Christmas gift, not a phone call to check if she was alive." "And when did he file for custody?" 3 months after Sophie's first major gallery sale. The paintings sold for over $400,000 total. I saw the judge's expression shift slightly. Just a flicker, but it was there. Finally, Sophie testified. The judge asked her if she wanted to, explained she didn't have to. Sophie said she wanted to. "Sophie," Patricia said gently, "do you want a relationship with your father?" Sophie thought about this. "I wanted to want one. Does that make sense? I wanted to believe he'd changed, that he regretted leaving, that he loved me. But he doesn't love me. He loves what I can do for him." At that dinner, he told me I had incredible market potential. Those were his words. He said I was an investment opportunity. He never asked if I was happy. He never asked what I wanted to paint. He asked what I could produce. "Do you want to live with him?" "No, I want to stay with my grandmother. She's the only parent I've ever known. She's the only one who's ever put me first. She sold her car to buy me art supplies when I was 10. She worked extra shifts at the library to pay for my first real easel. She never asked me to paint faster or produce more. She just loved my work because it was mine." Sophie looked at Daniel then, and I watched my granddaughter transform from a scared girl into a young woman with steel in her spine. "You called me a burden. Grandma called me a blessing. You left me crying on a porch. She held me every night for a year when I had colic. You want 25% of my earnings. She never asked for anything except for me to be happy. So no, Your Honor, I don't want to live with my biological father. I want to stay with my real parent." The courtroom was silent. Even Daniel's lawyer looked uncomfortable. Judge Martinez asked Daniel if he wanted to respond. He stood up, and I could see him trying to formulate something, anything that would salvage this. But what could he say? Sophie had laid it bare. "I made mistakes," he started, "but I'm trying to make up for them. I want to be part of my daughter's life." "What's your favorite painting of Sophie's?" the judge asked suddenly. Daniel blinked. "Excuse me? Your daughter is an artist. What's your favorite piece she's created?" There are so many excellent works. The one with the harbor at sunset was very well received commercially." "That's not what I asked. I asked which one is your favorite." Daniel couldn't answer. He didn't know. He'd probably never really looked at Sophie's art except to calculate its value. Judge Martinez turned to me. "Mrs. Walsh, same question. What's your favorite painting of Sophie's?" I didn't hesitate. The one she did when she was 8. It's a portrait of her mother, based on photographs. It's not technically perfect, but you can see the love in every brushstroke. She gave it to me on Mother's Day and told me I was her real mom. It hangs in my bedroom. It's not worth any money, but it's priceless to me. The judge made her decision right there. No need for deliberation. "I'm denying Mr. Walsh's petition for custody. Sophie will remain with her grandmother. Mr. Walsh, you had 17 years to be a father. You chose not to be. You don't get to choose now, when it's convenient and profitable. Your daughter deserves better than that." But she wasn't done. "Furthermore, I'm ordering Mr. Walsh to pay retroactive child support, 17 years at the state guidelines based on his income. Mrs. Walsh, please work with your attorney to calculate that amount. I suspect it will be substantial enough to cover Sophie's college education and then some. Additionally, Mr. Walsh is prohibited from contacting Sophie's gallery, her school, or any professional contacts related to her art career. He is not her representative. He has no rights to her work or her income. If he violates this order, he will be held in contempt. Finally, when Sophie turns 18 in 7 months, she will be a legal adult and can make her own choices about contact with her father. Until then, any visitation must be approved by both Sophie and Mrs. Walsh. Given Sophie's clear testimony today, I suspect those visits will not be happening." Daniel's face had gone white. His lawyer was scribbling notes furiously, probably already planning an appeal that would go nowhere. Patricia was smiling. Sophie was crying, but they were good tears. Relief tears. Outside the courthouse, Sophie hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for choosing me when he didn't. Thank you for every sacrifice. Thank you for seeing me as your granddaughter, not as an obligation or an opportunity." "Oh, sweetheart," I said, my own tears falling now. "You were never a burden. You were never an opportunity. You were always just Sophie, and that was always more than enough." We went home that day, back to our small house in Harpswell, with Sophie's paintings on every wall. The sunset over the bay was spectacular that evening, all oranges and pinks and purples. Sophie set up her easel on the porch and started a new painting. "What are you working on?" I asked. "A gift," she said. "For you. It's called Home." 3 months later, the child support payment came through. $187,000, enough to pay off my house, to set up a college fund for Sophie with plenty left over, to finally buy myself a new car. Sophie's next gallery show was scheduled for September. Margaret Chen expected it to do even better than the first. But this time, there was no question about who managed Sophie's career, who made decisions about her art, who got a say in her future. It was Sophie herself, with her grandmother beside her, the way it had always been, the way it should always have been. Daniel never appealed. He never reached out. By all accounts, his reputation in the Boston art world had taken a significant hit when word got out about the custody battle. Turns out people don't like working with someone who abandons their child and then tries to profit from them. Sophie turned 18 in January. She's at RISD now, thriving. She comes home every few weeks, and we talk on the phone almost daily. She's working on a series about family, about the difference between who raises you and who creates you. They're the most powerful pieces she's ever done. She asked me recently if I ever regretted taking her in that morning, if I ever wished I'd had the retirement I'd planned instead of starting over with a baby at 62. I told her the truth. That morning on the porch, cold and scared, with a crying infant in my arms, was the morning I found my purpose. She wasn't a burden. She wasn't an obligation. She was my second chance at motherhood, and I wouldn't trade a single sleepless night, a single worried moment, a single sacrifice for anything in the world. She painted that conversation. It's called 3:47 a.m., the time that phone call came that almost took her away from me. But in the painting, it's dawn, not the middle of the night. Light breaking through darkness, a new day beginning. That's what Sophie has always been for me. Not a burden left on a doorstep, but a gift. Not an obligation to bear, but a blessing to cherish. And no court, no biological father, no amount of money could ever change that simple truth. Some people say blood is thicker than water, but I learned that love is thicker than both. The kind of love that shows up at 2 a.m. when your baby has a fever. The kind that works double shifts to afford piano lessons and art supplies. The kind that holds you while you cry and celebrates every small victory. The kind that sees you not as an opportunity, but as a person worthy of unconditional devotion. That's the kind of love that makes a family. Not biology, not money, not convenience. Just love, pure and simple and strong enough to weather any storm. And in the end, that's exactly what saved us both.